You haven't seen those quotes, but they're out there, and I've said them on more than one occasion. And I've said them on television, I've said them in print. I just don't like the idea of somebody falsely identifying my religion. I suspect that you wouldn't appreciate that either. If you were a Muslim and somebody consistently said you were a Christian, I suspect that you would want to have that corrected, because that's offensive to your faith. I think my credentials on supporting Muslim Americans are very strong. Keep in mind, I'm the person who talked about discrimination against Arab Americans in my convention speech in 2004, something that I haven't heard too many other politicians talk about in the height of the scare after 9/11. I have visited mosques here in my community repeatedly and met with Muslim leaders on a wide range of occasions. So, what I would ask is that I am treated like other candidates in terms of expectations, and that people look at my entire record when it comes to anti-Muslim bias, when it comes to discrimination against Muslims or Arab Americans. I have been at the forefront of those fights and will continue to be when I'm President of the United States.
Senator, let me ask you a no-win follow-up. Do you think you could have come this far if you were a Muslim? That's a hypothetical that I don't know how to answer. I will tell you this, that the American people are more tolerant and more open-minded than I think a lot of the pundits give them credit for. And I think right now what they're interested in is who's going to help them get a job, who's going to make sure that they are able to send their kid to college, who can deliver for them. And if they have confidence that I am going to be able to make their lives better or work with them to open up opportunities for them to achieve the American dream, I think I'll have their support. And if on the other hand they think I'm not going to help them do that, then it doesn't matter what my religion is or what my skin color is. I probably won't get their support.
One more question from the audience.
Thank you, Senator. I'm John Yang, NBC News White House correspondent and a member of the Asian American Journalists Association. I'd like to ask you about affirmative action. Just this morning, Senator McCain endorsed an Arizona ballot initiative that would end preferences based on race and gender in that state. The author of that initiative, Ward Connerly, says your very success undercuts the argument for affirmative action. If the United States were to have a president of color, would there still be a need for affirmative action?
Well, look, I am a strong supporter of affirmative action when properly structured, so that it is not just a quota, but it is acknowledging and taking into account some of the hardships and difficulties that communities of color may have experienced, continue to experience, and it also speaks to the value of diversity in all walks of American life. We are becoming a more diverse culture, and it's something that has to be acknowledged. I've also said that affirmative action is not going to be the long-term solution to the problems of race in America, because frankly, if you've got 50% of African American or Latino kids dropping out of high school, it doesn't really matter what you do in terms of affirmative action. Those kids are not getting into college. And there have been times where I think affirmative action has been viewed as a shortcut to solving some of these broader, long-term structural problems. I also think that we have to think about affirmative action and craft it in such a way where some of our children who are advantaged aren't getting more favorable treatment than a poor white kid who's struggled more. That has to be taken into account. So I think that whether it's in terms, particularly when it comes to college admissions, what I'm interested in is programs that take a wide range of issues into account. I think a university or a college should be able to take into account race, but they should also be able to take into account class and hardship and difficulty in making assessments about whether or not a young person is deserving of opportunity. I am disappointed, though, that John McCain flipped and changed his position. I think in the past he had been opposed to these kinds of Ward-Carnley referenda or initiatives as divisive, and I think he's right. The truth of the matter is these are not designed to solve a big problem, but they're all too often designed to drive a wedge between people. And one thing that I'm absolutely convinced about, after having traveled all across the world over the last week, is that one of our greatest strengths is the fact that we come from so many different places, and yet we are all Americans. The Iraqis and the Afghans, when they talked to me about our military, not only were they impressed with how effective our military was, but they were also impressed with the fact that we had people from all walks of life who looked different, all joining together as Americans. They were impressed with the fact that our main commanding officer now in Iraq is an African American. That, I think, is what makes America special, and we shouldn't lose that. We shouldn't either lose that or see that as a source of division. It should be a source of pride, and when properly structured, affirmative action, I think, can be a part of that.
And Senator, if I could just follow with this one point. It was about a year ago, you were with many of us in this audience, and you were asked about whether or not you were black enough. Obviously, that question has gone by the wayside. You have 90% approval rating from the African American community.
No, I'm too black.
Too black, you said. Is there a I didn't say that.
No, I'm just teasing, but it does point, and this is why I was getting to Leonard's question. I do think that there is this sense of going back and forth depending on the time of day in terms of making assessments about my candidacy, and I think that what we're trying to do is simply work as hard as we can around the values and ideals that led me into this race, and that I think are what are needed right now in order for us to move this country forward.
Thank you very much, Senator, for sharing your impressions of your trip and taking our questions this afternoon.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.